Okay, so let's go on to example 2 now. Instead of doing sine, the inverse of sine, we're going to do the inverse of cosine. Hooray! So if we look at the points that we want to make our t-chart from, we're going to use negative 2 pi 1, negative 3 pi over 2, negative 3 halves pi 0, negative pi 0, negative pi over 2 0, 0 1, pi over 2 0, pi negative 1, 3 pi over 2 0, and 2 pi 1. It is going to be all of these points right here. So those are the points that make up our t-chart. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take these points and we're going to flip them. We're going to put y first, we're going to put x second, and we are going to find our arccosine. So if we say already, so here is the actual function. There's my function. Well, what's the inverse of that function? Well, I'm glad you asked. We're going to take these values and we're going to flip them. So I'm going to plot the point 1, negative 2x, negative 3 halves x 0, negative 1, negative pi, 0, pi over 2, and 1, 0. These are the points I have plotted so far. What I did is I just flipped them. So they are inverses of each other. 1, 2 pi, 0, negative 3 pi over 2, negative 1, negative pi, 0, negative pi over 2, 1, 0. Now we're going to keep plotting our points. 0, pi over 2, 0, pi over 2, negative 1 pi, 0, 3 pi over 2, and then 2 pi, which is 1. Then when I make my sine wave, or it's actually a cosine wave, but we just call them generically, they're sine waves. Boom. You can see that the inverse of cosine is not a function. So cosine is not a one-to-one function because the inverse cosine graph is not a function. So what are we going to do? Well, we are again going to restrict our inputs. And we're only going to put in our values from 0 to pi. We're only putting in values from 0 to pi to give us our values out. So we're only going to go from 0 to pi. This means when we do our graphs are going to be in quadrants 1 and 2. Because if you're looking at your unit circle, here's 0, here's pi, and that's where we're going to be graphing our inverse of our cosine. So let's figure that out. Let's see if I can figure these inverse cosines or these arccosines out. Remember, cosine is the x value on my unit circle, and I know I want to use my unit circle because it says without a calculator. So we are going to look at our radians, and we want to find the value of cosine sine, and what they're giving me is the cosines. So we are going to draw in our unit circle. Now, even though it'd be helpful for me to have the unit circle memorized, I always have to go back to the basics. So I'm looking at this. I'm gonna ignore the sign for a minute. I'm gonna say 1/2. So I know when I draw in my unit circles, this is the point radical 3 over 2 for my cosine, and then this is radical 2 over 2 for the cosine, and then this gives me 1/2 for cosine. I'm not worried about the sine values because I'm talking cosine. Alrighty. So I know coming up this way that is going to put me at pi over 3 radians. So my reference angle is pi over 3 because the point I want is this point right here at -1/2. Well, and if we do the sine value, it's radical 3 over 2. So that's the point I want. Its reference angle will also be pi over 3. So we want to find out what this angle actually gives me. So I am going to do pi minus pi over 3 because that's my reference angle. So 3 pi over 3, get my common denominators, minus pi over 3. That gives me 2 pi over 3. And there is the inverse cosine of -1/2. And I wanted this side because that's where x is negative. Alrighty. Of course, memorizing your unit circle is going to make your job a little bit easier, but you can always make it as you go like I just did. Arccosine. This is saying the same thing as inverse sine. So if we are looking at our unit circle, -3 pi over 2. I'm sorry, negative radical 3 over 2. Goodness. Negative radical 3 over 2 and 1/2 is the point we're looking at. Well, this gives me a reference angle of pi over 6. So I am going to do pi minus pi over 6. So 6 pi over 6, I'm rewriting it with a common denominator, minus pi over 6. That gives me an answer of 5 pi over 6. Which angle gives me this x value on the unit circle? 5 pi over 6. Boom. Or if you're doing it in degrees, it would be 150 degrees. Either one. But it didn't specify, so we are going to use, it said evaluate in radians without a calculator. So we totally wanted to do it in radians. It did say. And then C, if we look at our unit circle, focusing on quadrants 1 and 2, because that's where we are restricting our domain to. We're restricting our domain from 0 to pi, so we're up here. I want cosine to be 0. So it has to be this point. It can't be this point down below because we've restricted our values to be on top. So we're looking at the point 0, 1, which radian gives me a cosine of 0. And that's pi over 2. Boom. And that is how we do our cosines. Not bad, right? So we are going to go ahead and we will call that, we'll keep it short for this video, just at 8 minutes. And next we are going to move on to tangent.